Mainstream glorification of endless grinding, extreme sleep deprivation, and relentless daily hustle is not merely a cultural phenomenon. It is a highly classified, heavily engineered biological scam. The exact physiological consequences of the modern hustle mentality are actively being suppressed by the attention economy, because exposing the clinical truth would completely destroy the foundation of the modern workforce. The window of opportunity to reverse the severe structural brain damage caused by this toxic lifestyle is rapidly shrinking. Millions of exhausted adults falsely believe they are building elite discipline and securing future wealth by sacrificing their rest and consuming massive doses of synthetic stimulants. This is a catastrophic medical deception. In the rigorous fields of clinical neuroscience, this specific behavioral pattern is not classified as high performance. It is recognized as a direct catalyst for severe, irreversible early-stage neurodegeneration. Those who remain willfully blind to the unfiltered biological breakdown exposed in the next few minutes are actively choosing to accelerate their own cognitive decline. They will permanently lose the physical brain density required for advanced intellectual dominance. The system extracts their metabolic energy, drains their physical vitality, and leaves them with a severely shrunken prefrontal cortex, completely incapable of generating true, sovereign power. Why is the modern hustle mentality a biological scam? Understanding the profound deception of the modern hustle requires a clinical examination of the human body's evolutionary stress response mechanism. Throughout human history, extreme physical and psychological exertion was strictly reserved for acute, life-or-death survival situations. When an ancient human faced a lethal predator, the brain's threat detection center immediately flooded the bloodstream with high-octane stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, forcing the organism into a temporary state of violent hyperarousal. Once the threat was neutralized, the biological machine immediately returned to a profound state of parasympathetic rest, allowing the cellular architecture to repair itself. The modern hustle mentality is a biological scam because it artificially traps the human nervous system in this exact state of lethal hyperarousal permanently. The corporate matrix has successfully convinced the global population that existing in a continuous, uninterrupted state of biological panic is a moral virtue. When a highly driven individual attempts to execute complex analytical tasks while severely sleep-deprived, constantly checking digital metrics, and racing against artificial deadlines, their limbic system cannot differentiate between the modern office and a literal physical predator. The adrenal glands are forced to pump highly toxic volumes of stress hormones into the cardiovascular system every single day. The fake performer interprets this frantic, racing heart rate and shallow breathing as immense motivation, completely unaware that their internal organs are essentially screaming in terror. They believe they are outworking the competition, but in strict physiological reality, they are simply triggering a massive, uncontrolled inflammatory response that actively degrades their cellular integrity. The system profits immensely from this frantic, unthinking labor, while the individual is left bearing the devastating physiological cost of a completely shattered endocrine system. This is the ultimate scam, trading irreplaceable biological longevity for the fleeting illusion of high-status productivity. How does severe sleep deprivation destroy the glymphatic system? The most devastating weapon utilized by this biological scam is the aggressive normalization of severe sleep deprivation. The hustle culture openly mocks rest, commanding individuals to sacrifice their sleep to achieve financial dominance. This is the exact mechanism that guarantees permanent cognitive failure. The human brain does not simply shut down during sleep. It initiates a highly advanced, mandatory macro-waste clearance protocol known clinically as the glymphatic system. Throughout the waking hours, the intense metabolic demands of high-level problem-solving produce highly toxic byproducts, including beta-amyloid plaques and tau proteins. These are highly corrosive biological waste materials that accumulate rapidly within the delicate neural networks. The lymphatic system remains completely inactive while the individual is awake. It only fully activates during the deepest stages of delta wave sleep. When an organism enters this profound state of neurological silence, the brain's glial cells physically shrink by up to 60%, allowing cerebrospinal fluid to violently wash through the neural tissue, rapidly flushing these highly toxic proteins entirely out of the skull and into the peripheral circulatory system for elimination. When the modern fake performer sacrifices sleep to grind for 14 hours a day, they violently interrupt this non-negotiable biological cleansing process. The highly toxic beta-amyloid proteins remain trapped inside the brain. They accumulate, harden, and actively suffocate the surrounding neurons. This is not a temporary state of morning brain fog. This is the literal onset of structural neurodegeneration. By willfully engaging in chronic sleep deprivation, the individual is actively choosing to poison their own central nervous system, guaranteeing severe memory loss, shattered focus, and early-onset cognitive decline. They are destroying the very biological machine required to actually enjoy the wealth they falsely believe they are building. What is the neurological cost of synthetic caffeine dependence? To mask the debilitating exhaustion caused by this massive accumulation of toxic brain waste, the fake performer becomes entirely dependent on the aggressive consumption of synthetic central nervous system stimulants, primarily high-dose caffeine. The hustle matrix aggressively promotes caffeine consumption as a tool for elite execution, but the clinical reality of how these chemicals interact with human neurochemistry exposes yet another layer of this biological trap. The human brain produces a specific neurotransmitter called adenosine, which accumulates steadily throughout the day. Adenosine binds to specific neural receptors, creating the biological pressure that forces the organism to sleep and initiate cellular repair. Caffeine does not actually provide the body with any genuine metabolic energy. It operates purely as an adenosine antagonist. It violently forcefully blocks the adenosine receptors, creating a temporary, artificial illusion of wakefulness. While the brain is artificially blocked from feeling fatigue, the biological debt continues to compound at a terrifying rate. The toxic metabolic waste continues to accumulate rapidly, and the adrenal glands are forcefully squeezed to produce even more synthetic panic. The individual relies on these massive chemical spikes simply to force their exhausted physical body into movement. Over time, the brain attempts to protect itself from this severe chemical assault by actively growing more adenosine receptors, which immediately causes the individual to require substantially higher doses of the synthetic stimulant just to achieve a baseline level of normal functioning. This severe biological dependency creates a highly volatile, completely dysregulated nervous system. The individual completely loses the ability to access natural endogenous energy. When the chemical stimulation inevitably wears off, the massive, accumulated wave of adenosine violently crashes into the newly formed receptors, causing a catastrophic cognitive collapse. The fake performer is not executing with elite energy. They are simply borrowing time from their future cognitive lifespan at a devastatingly high biological interest rate. How does chronic oxidative stress cause premature brain aging? This relentless cycle of sleep deprivation, synthetic stimulation, and continuous limbic panic rapidly transitions from behavioral exhaustion into severe structural brain decay. Operating daily under this extreme allostatic load forces the body to sustain unnaturally high levels of circulating cortisol. This continuous flood of stress hormones aggressively compromises the blood-brain barrier and triggers a massive systemic inflammatory response directly inside the skull. The brain's specialized immune cells, known scientifically as the microglia, are forcefully activated by this chronic state of emergency. Desperately attempting to manage the internal crisis, the microglia rapidly release highly corrosive inflammatory cytokine. This catastrophic physiological process bathes the surrounding delicate neural networks in severe oxidative stress. The neural pathways literally become irritated, inflamed, and physically swollen. The rapid electrical signals required for high-speed problem-solving, pattern recognition, and memory retrieval begin to physically misfire. Over time, the constant exposure to this localized chemical fire causes the gray matter in the prefrontal cortex to physically shrink and atrophy. The prefrontal cortex is the evolutionary masterpiece of the human brain, strictly responsible for advanced impulse control and deep analytical thought. As the hustle mentality forces this critical region to wither away, the individual literally loses the brain density required for advanced intellectual dominance. They biologically revert to a highly reactive, emotionally volatile, primitive state. This is the terrifying clinical reality of premature cognitive aging. The individual might look busy and powerful on the outside, but internally, their central nervous system is entirely crumbling under the weight of severe oxidative damage. The hustle mentality is literally aging their brain 10 years faster than a biologically optimized human. Why does fake productivity physically rot your neural pathways? The structural decay is violently accelerated by the execution methods glorified by the fake productivity matrix. The hustle culture demands constant multitasking, rapid context switching, and absolute digital availability. Millions of adults believe that answering emails, watching synthetic entertainment, and attempting complex analytical work simultaneously makes them highly efficient operators. In strict clinical reality, the human brain is entirely incapable of parallel processing complex cognitive tasks. When an individual constantly shifts their visual and cognitive attention between multiple digital dashboards, they force the brain to violently halt and restart its cognitive processing engine. This clinical pathology is known in neuroscience as cognitive fragmentation. Every single time attention shifts from one high-friction task to a cheap digital stimulus, the brain leaves behind a highly toxic neurochemical residue known as attention residue. The neural pathways literally become severely exhausted from the constant, unnatural friction of context switching. The dopamine receptors in the basal ganglia become severely blunted, physically scarred, and completely unresponsive to normal, healthy stimuli. The individual physically loses the primal, genetic drive to conquer difficult tasks. They can no longer sustain deep, unfragmented focus because their neural pathways have literally rotted from the constant chaotic friction. They have successfully trained their central nervous system to become an elite biological machine at being constantly interrupted. Their cognitive ceiling collapses permanently. They move rapidly, they sweat, and they feel incredibly busy, but their actual high-level intellectual output is entirely worthless. The scam is complete. The individual has sacrificed their ultimate biological weapon, their ability to focus, in exchange for the fleeting validation of looking busy to a system that views them as entirely disposable. What is the exact biohacking protocol to reverse neurodegeneration? The window of opportunity to reverse this severe structural brain damage and escape the biological scam of the hustle mentality is actively closing right now. Ignoring the clinical reality of oxidative stress and cognitive fragmentation is a direct, conscious choice to accept irreversible neurodegeneration and a life of low-status intellectual mediocrity. Elite performers, top earners, and advanced clinical biohackers absolutely refuse to participate in this scam. They are monopolizing the exact longevity protocols required to purge this synthetic stimulation, drastically lower their cortisol baseline, and rebuild the physical density of their neuro-architecture today. Reclaiming absolute biological dominance requires the total, uncompromising, violent destruction of the fake productivity illusion. The mainstream digital economy is heavily incentivized to keep the global population biologically compromised, perpetually exhausted, and highly profitable. Healing the shattered nervous system requires executing a strict, ruthless clinical protocol before the damage to the prefrontal cortex becomes completely permanent. This precise protocol begins with the aggressive, absolute protection of the circadian rhythm and the non-negotiable optimization of deep delta-wave sleep. There is absolutely zero room for moderation when dealing with proven biological decay. The biological machine must be forcefully guided into a deep, sustained state of neurological silence. The individual must mandate total darkness and extreme temperature regulation to force the glymphatic system to activate and violently flush the accumulated toxic beta-amyloid proteins out of the skull. Furthermore, the complete elimination of synthetic adenosine antagonists is mandatory. The nervous system must be allowed to experience genuine, profound fatigue, so the dopamine receptors can finally be granted the absolute silence required to physically heal, regenerate, and permanently regain their primal sensitivity. The individual must aggressively retrain their brain to engage in prolonged, unfragmented deep work without requiring any external synthetic triggers. Output must be strictly monitored and managed, prioritizing an ultra-low cortisol baseline to completely extinguish the localized chemical fire of neuroinflammation. Transitioning away from the hustle scam is not a casual workflow adjustment. It is a mandatory biological recalibration for anyone serious about unlocking genuine elite cognitive performance. Understanding this classified clinical reality provides a massive evolutionary advantage, but simply knowing the truth is entirely useless without aggressive, uncompromising daily execution. The mainstream productivity matrix relies entirely on keeping the public biologically weak, perpetually frantic, and highly manipulatable. The exact biological loophole elite performers use to completely bypass structural brain decay and operate in absolute silence is actively being suppressed by the algorithm, because a genuinely optimized, highly intelligent human deeply threatens the established attention economy. The specific microprotocols required to activate the glymphatic system, rebuild the prefrontal cortex, and restore silent cognitive dominance are treated as classified information. The window to access these daily tactical commands and reverse the neurodegeneration is shrinking fast. The cost of inaction is permanent structural brain shrinkage, the total collapse of deep focus, and surrendering thousands of hours to a fake, toxic, unprofitable grind. Subscribe to this channel right now to secure the biological baseline and permanently reject this engineered deception. The algorithm attempts to hide these leaked methods quickly. Do not wait for the hustle matrix to completely rot the nervous system. Take absolute control.